Welcome back to Inside Games, the only gaming show brave enough to say that if you want to wait for a sale to buy a video game, that's okay.
Wait, this...
Yeah, that's all right.
This is brave now? We're giving people permission to wait for sales?
Well, hold on there, Lawrence. If people buy cheap games, then no more video games will ever be made, ever.
What, really? This is going to kill video games?
Yeah, if you buy the one game on that Steam sale, if you bought like, what is it, Hobo Tough Life for $7, then no more games. That's it.
Well, I guess I have a never installed copy of Just Cause 4 that's just waiting to blow up on us. Damn.
We're over-dramatizing the situation a bit like we always do, but only a bit. This week, Days Gone creative director John Garvin shared some hot takes about the gamers on David Jaffe's interview show, which is oddly becoming a hotbed of spicy game drama.
Note, this is not the same story we reported on last week, even though it sounds nearly identical. David Jaffe show, Days Gone developer. No, this one's a new one.
Rather than restate or editorialize Garvin's comments, we'll just share them with you here in full. For context, this is in response to Jaffe asking about Days Gone's rise in exposure now that it's freely available through PlayStation Plus.
If you love a game, buy it at fucking full price. I can't tell you how many times I've seen gamers say, yeah, I got that on sale.
But how do you know you love a game until you've played it?
I'm just saying you don't, but don't complain if a game doesn't get a sequel if it wasn't supported at launch. It's like God of War got, whatever number of millions of sales at launch, and, Days Gone didn't. So it's like, for whatever reason, it's like, just speaking for me personally as a developer, I don't work for Sony. Yeah. I don't know what the numbers are. I can tell you that when we were doing, God, which was it? It was one of the early, or Dark Mirror, I think. We got so fucked on Dark Mirror because piracy was a thing and Sony really wasn't kind of caught up on what piracy was doing to sales. And we would show them torrents. A torrent site had 200,000 copies of Dark Mirror being downloaded. If I remember that right, my numbers could be wrong, but regardless, it was kind of those things. I was pissed about it then. I was like, this is money out of my pocket. It's like, so I think the uptick in engagement with the game is not as important as, did you buy the game at full price? Because if you did, then that's supporting the developers directly.
Hoo-wee! Did Garvin ever step into it on that one? Yowza.
Nothing really quite hits like a creator blaming their own audience for their lack of success, right?
Yeah, that's what it feels like is being said. That's maybe jumping to some conclusions, but let's be honest, that's not exactly what Garvin is saying here.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot going on here, and while it could be very easy for us to just gleefully rip this to shreds, like the internet loves to do, puff out our chests as the defender of the downtrodden consumer, like everybody always does, we're a bit more nuanced, like we like to do here on the show.
Yeah, but I mean, we get to dunk just a little bit, right? Teeny little dunk. Just boop. So here's my mini dunk. That take is rough. Oh my gosh. So for some obvious reasons. One, how are you even gonna know you're gonna love a game before you buy it? And even more than that, someone can certainly love a game they bought for $20 enough to want to ask for a sequel. They would have shown up day one, but they didn't know yet. It's just backwards logic all around.
TBF, he is saying that if you personally did not buy the game at full price, then you personally shouldn't complain about the lack of a sequel. So we're not talking to the audience as a whole. He's talking to that one person or those few people that did not buy the game at full price. Then that means you shouldn't complain. He's not blaming people as much as telling people that interest after a game's launch doesn't matter. That window is already passed.
Either way, the sentiment is a complicated one, touches on a lot of topics. From the way that sequels are greenlit at publishers to how Metacritic influences a game's perception and performance. It's tough.
It gets into an emotional territory about how we, as game players and enthusiasts, affect games being made in the first place.
Let's dig into that to whatever degree we can, starting with how all those gamer emotions get processed and hit with statements like this. A statement like this kind of hits you in the feels a little bit because it makes it sound like a creator is blaming you for the lack of something you love getting made, and that obviously goes to a passionate place.
We are creators ourselves, so we get what Garvin is saying from the creator standpoint, but it stems from a logical mistake that's very easy to make, and I have made very many times. You can never treat your audience as a single entity. It's really easy to do it.
That being said, I think we get a certain kind of frustration there, to put it maybe in Garvin's perspective. The gamers, they didn't buy Days Gone on day one, and now the gamers are back screaming about how a sequel's not getting made, so you gamers should have gone out there and bought the damn game in the first place, right?
But, and we're sure Garvin knows this, they're not the same people. Maybe the people mourning the game now did show up for you and your team on day one with $60. Or worse, you just didn't hear about the game until later when it was already discounted. I know Days Gone wasn't a huge hit when it first came out. Like, it wasn't marketed to all to hell. So you played it, you loved it, and even went to an interview stream with one of the creators, only to hear that you didn't do it right. So that doesn't feel good.
Not to mention, you can't tell people to change their past behavior. Unless you figured out time travel, in which case, why the hell are you in 2021?
All that said, we get Garvin's frustrations here. Creating shit is hard. It really is, especially a 5-year game. Especially when it has to compete with, everything else in the world all the time. Porn as well. You can grind away at something, release it to the world, and then it just kind of does okay.
Just as an empathy exercise, imagine being a game dev, you're worried about sales, you're feeling the weight of your family at home and your team at work, and then you see people on the internet casually waving away a 60-hour open world game as being too expensive for $60 on launch day, or even bragging about pirating it, or bragging about waiting for a sale or something like that. It stings. It can get under your skin a little bit.
I think Garvin's just trying to, in an aggressive way, remind everyone of the practical aspect of game making. If it doesn't sell, there won't be another, and getting upset about it or launching change.org petitions is not going to do a thing.
Still, we can call a foul on Garvin's part for kind of referring to everyone in the gaming marketplace as one entity with a communal thought pattern. That doesn't really work.
But now the real bomb, Lawrence. It seems he's actually fucking right.
So yeah, that's the thing. It'd be easy to tear into this on a logical perspective and an emotional perspective and just rip to shreds, but we can't find any examples of it happening contrary to how he lays it out. But maybe not for the reasons that it would seem or the reasons he seemed to lay out himself.
When it specifically comes to greenlighting sequels, publishers seem to make that decision based on the first few weeks of sales in most cases. There are obviously a ton of factors that go into that decision, but the first 2 weeks of sales seem to be the biggest one.
It's strange, and it's not a revenue thing, which is weird. So the way Garvin said it's like, you gotta buy it when it's $60. That kind of makes it feel like publishers need all those fat $60 sales to justify making another game, but it seems to be more a question of logistics and demonstrated market demand than just short-term greed or needing that giant check in the first week.
The math is pretty clear. Games that go on sale post-launch can often rack up more unit sales and revenue than in their launch period. This trend was noticed back in 2012 when Steam sales had everyone wondering if 25-cent games would devalue the entire industry. So it's possible.
There was concern back when those steep discounts started going on, like you were saying, Bruce, that if we were selling games for a quarter, then people would come to expect to only buy games for a quarter and it would devalue every game on Steam. But that actually ended up not being the case, insofar as publishers realized tons of, low dollar sales without really affecting their launch day revenues. It was pretty cool.
This trend has continued to the Nintendo Switch, where multiple indie devs report seeing stronger sales and revenues after deep discounts on the Nintendo Switch eShop.
That seems to prove that a $60 price point isn't required for profitability. And yet, it's still extremely hard to find a game that didn't have strong opening sales, but then did get a sequel from the same publisher.
It's also a tough topic to research because publishers rarely discuss the reasons behind their decision-making, for obvious reasons. Nobody wants to be the villain for passing on a fan-loved project, like exactly what happened to Sony here.
Yeah, likewise, publishers rarely discuss why they do greenlight something, unless they want PR points for being behind a project that's a risky or artistic shot.
But still, if we want to dismiss Garvin's advice as elitist, greedy bullshit, we got to find a case study disproving it. We need to find a game that didn't sell well initially, later had a swell of sales, and then got greenlit for a sequel.
Yeah, what I was looking for is a game that's sort of the antithesis to Garvin's statement, that you need the front-loaded sales. So a game that has super long tail, sells really well at low dollar amounts, and then gets a full sequel. That, is actually extremely hard to find. So I did poke around to some kind of higher profile, less expected sequels and try to analyze the situation or their publishing agreements. First up was Mirror's Edge Catalyst, which came out in 2016. Yeah, that seemed like a really odd game for Electronic Arts to greenlight at the time. The original game released in 2008. It sold 2.5 million units, though apparently that wasn't really a problem for EA at the time. Former vice president in charge of Worldwide Studios, Patrick Soderlund, said that, quote, the whole company was behind a sequel.
Yeah, so one would think 2.5 million units would not be enough for EA, of all companies, to be gung-ho on a sequel.
Yeah, luckily Soderlund offered some commentary on why EA picked up a sequel in a Polygon feature from 2016.
Yeah, he said, quote, there's a lot of learnings that, should we not build another Mirror's Edge for various reasons, a lot of the things that we've done will serve as great learnings for whatever else we build. As you know, EA is pushing quite hard as a company to move into the action space. A lot of stuff like going into an open world structure, going to a non-linear narrative, building out characters and stories. These are things that we need to learn and perfect as a company. Sometimes you have to look at it long term.
So if you take the quote at face value, EA greenlit Mirror's Edge Catalyst because it represented more value to the company than just what it was expected to take in terms of money from the market. I will say, though, it seems like those lessons were learned. Soderlund then says the future of the series would be based on, guess what? Sales.
He says, quote, whether or not there's another Mirror's Edge is going to be up to the people out there. If we can convince them that there's a market for this, that people want to buy it, and if they tell us they want another one, then we'll make another one. If the answer is that there wasn't a big enough audience, it's too difficult and too much work goes into making a game, to build a game that we know people probably don't want.
Never released sales figures for Catalyst. Closest I could get there was an EA representative commented that Catalyst was, quote, definitely meeting our expectations in 2016. And Wedbush analyst Michael Pachter estimated sales at around 2 million.
So here's another example that Lawrence found, Sunset Overdrive. So there's no official sales numbers. VG Charts puts it at 1.16 million. No sequel. I know Lawrence you love this game. I know you always wanted to get a sequel for it, but when asked about a sequel, Ted Price said, ask Microsoft.
That quote implies pretty clearly that Microsoft passed on a Sunset Overdrive 2, and we can only presume they did that because it didn't sell.
The game has been on Game Pass, so maybe it can be an example of a post-launch surge leading to a sequel?
The stage is set for it to be that kind of game, but it probably won't be for the exact reason that disproved that whole thing. So, as we know, Sony bought Insomniac, and Insomniac actually had the rights to Sunset. So Sony owns Sunset now. And yeah, as soon as Sony bought Insomniac, they could have greenlit a Sunset Overdrive 2. They could have done that. But what did they do instead? They gave them Spider-Man, the fastest selling superhero game in US history.
Of course they did. Yeah, they were like, well, do we make Sunset Overdrive something no one's ever heard of and demonstrated that there is no place in the market for it? Or Spider-Man?
It seems silly because this is theoretically the exact example we're looking for. And when you have A on one side and B on the other, it's obvious which one you go with.
Lawrence, you also found Xenoblade. It's an example of a game that didn't sell all that well, but still got sequels greenlit somehow.
So Xenoblade's weird because Xenoblade Chronicles did not really chart top when it launched at all. And the definitive edition eventually sold 1.48 million units. That's the remaster. But it's not a huge seller, and it didn't break up any sales charts, and yet Nintendo greenlit a sequel and DLC for it. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 didn't break top 10s in any region when it launched, but it still turned out to be Monolith Soft's best-selling game, eventually selling 1.92 million units as of December 31st, 2019.
Maybe there is a more valuable thing for Xenoblade to Nintendo as a company. Sort of like the EA thing with Mirror's Edge, where they're like, well, we want to make action games. So Mirror's Edge is action. Maybe maybe Xenoblade applies to Nintendo that way. Yeah,
I think you're right. Maybe Xenoblade is their RPG foothold in the West. Because they don't really have one. I guess they have Fire Emblem. Oddly, one of the only examples that actually kind of does fit this exact circumstance is Puyo Puyo Tetris. It's a game that was originally released in 2014 for just a mammoth lineup of systems, basically all of them. And it's a 6-year-old game, and suddenly a sequel came out last year. So it's had years and years to rack up sales, we presume. And then eventually a sequel got greenlit because of all those years of sales. There's not really much information to go on here.
Tetris is a known brand. Just like Marvel's Spider-Man, I feel like you're going to get some sales just because it's Tetris, and people will see it on the shelf and go, oh, Tetris.
Yeah, a series that has that brand associated with it may not have the same rules apply as to, again, to throw it all the way back, what Garvin was talking about the first few weeks of sales being critical to developing a sequel. What's really crazy is we're actually really close to a pretty bizarre and standout example. There's a game coming out next week called R-Type Final 2. That's a sequel to a 2004 game that does have a pretty cult following, but it's a cult following of a shoot-'em-up genre, which itself is very, very small. So who knows why that sequel got greenlit. It was lifted up by a crowdfunding campaign, which does, that seems to be the real way that this happens. The real way that any game that misses its first launch window, it can really only survive as a sequel if it gets 1 million plus on a crowdfund platform. That's kind of what happened to Psychonauts 2, Shenmue 3. Those all kind of, it had demonstrated market purchasing intent. Like, people were willing to put down money on it And wouldn't you know it, that's what determines whether or not things get made.
Well, that's the best investment because then you've already got their money. So now you can be like, all right, well, we got their money, so we'll make their product. I mean, like that's a much better business than if your day's gone, you're making an original IP and hoping that people buy it. And then if they don't, well, you're fucked. So do we have a takeaway here? It's just a bunch of changing circumstances.
Yeah, I think our sample size is way too small to draw a really tight conclusion from. It really does seem that the trend is publishers either they say yes based on your first 2 weeks of sales, or you crowdfund it 6 years down the line.
All right, well, let's change our perspective then. Imagine that you're a game publisher and you launched a game, Action Bro Explosion. Congrats! Except now you got developers sitting around not doing anything. What are you gonna make next?
You're in week 1 of the game being out, right? You don't know in week 1 if the sales 6 months down the line are gonna suddenly surge based off of an influencer's video, some random dude's live stream, a well-timed discount. That's in the future. You don't have that information right now.
Yeah, so you make a decision about what you're gonna do next based on the early performance of Action Bro Explosion. Because it's right now, and that's all the info you've got. You can't count on Among Us coming back 2 years later, you know?
Let's dive a little bit further into this roleplay here. It's 4 years later. You've released your second game, and you switch tracks. It's Walkie Simageddon. And while you were developing this game, good news, Action Bro Explosion went on sale, and it became a viral hit. That's great, because it gave you plenty of revenue to keep developing a Walkie Simageddon, and to buy a lot of marketing for it. Now you have this game out, it had a proper marketing campaign, you paid influencers to play it. Boom, your first day of sales outsells Action Bro Explosion all the way back.
Time to greenlight the third game because you're actually an operating business. Do you make a sequel to Bro Explosion, hoping that it'll have similar long tail sales? Do you make a sequel to Walkie Sim, which you marketed perfectly and has earned a ton of money? Also, half the Bro Explosion team left the company to go work for Riot.
So that's what you're dealing with, you know? And from that perspective, it kind of makes sense why greenlighting decisions are based on that $60 window time frame of game sales.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, and that's all we've got right now, it does seem like Garvin is correct at the end of all of it, though implicating gamers as the responsible party and kind of subtly blaming their unwillingness to pay $60 for a game, that's the misguided part of it.
Garvin, I don't know how long Garvin's been in the business, but it's probably been a pretty long time. And I would imagine that this gentleman absolutely knows his business. So when he's telling you, hey, you should buy the game for $60 when it comes out if you want to support a sequel, he's probably right because he has 20 or 30 years of whatever experience, you know, and I know you don't want to hear it. I understand that. And for me, the takeaway has always been, and I always say this at the end of almost every episode of this show, if you don't like it, don't buy it. The exact opposite is true. If you do like it, then support it with everything you got. Tell all your friends, tell them to go buy the game. You go, you know, you buy all the DLC, like support it with your money. Because if you're just like out there on Reddit being like, you should buy Days Gone or whatever, that's awesome. But they're not going to see the sales at all from your Reddit comments. So you need to give them your money if you want to support the game.
I agree with that. I tend to be a teensy bit more cynical, mostly because I've seen the gamers try to like come together and display collective action before, and it doesn't really hold water. So also just the way that marketing works, you can try to understand the ins and outs of the business. You can try to support your favorite devs by paying $60 on launch day. You can try to spread the word to everyone you know, but all of those things I think are still crushed under the money that gets moved by a really good commercial during the NBA Finals or something like that. So we're the enthusiasts. We like to dig down, we like to understand things, but there are market forces that dictate the direction of AAA games that are far beyond our grasp, and that's just the way it is in any creative industry. The film buffs aren't the ones who are going to dictate where the movie industry goes, it's the mass market. And that's kind of beyond our ability to control or manipulate. And if it weren't, then society would be very different.
Yeah. Welcome to grown-up video games. Sometimes you make something great and nobody cares. And then people are going to do what they're going to do. So that's just the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah, that's kind of it. But, at the end of it, there's still a place for diplomacy, too. You can't... When people are stinging from a video game, you can't tell them it was their fault, even if it was. If the market doesn't buy something, that's just how it goes. I don't know. Still, Days Gone is coming to PC, so that's like, I didn't play it because I didn't want to play it on a PlayStation. I want to 60 FPS or death. That's where I'm at. So I'll finally play it, and maybe I'll love it, but I wasn't there $60 day one.
They've got my sales for PC, but I completely agree with you, Lawrence. Days Gone was an original IP that I heard waffling things about, so it's kind of like,
That's how it goes sometimes.